now hear from three keynotes to give us a view on how and why collaboration is changing supply chains and procurement, help them build webs of value rather than just supply chains, rather like I alluded to earlier. So Tony Dunnage, David Cowell, and Matt Wilson, if you'd like to come up and take a seat, that would be great. We're actually going to run this session with 3 10-minute slots, one for each of the speakers, obviously, and then ask you to have a 15-minute conversation on your teams. And the purpose of the conversation in the teams is for you to create an understanding of what the issues are they've described and to generate 2 or 3 questions you think would be really useful to raise back to the panel. Then we'll have a Q&A session afterwards. So during the 15 minutes, you're going to do that bit. So let's get going. Let's firstly welcome up Tony Dunnage, Group Environmental Engineering Manager at Unilever. He's Unilever's zero hero, the man behind the extraordinary 100% zero waste achievement that was carried out in collaboration with Unilever's supply chain team and their factories around the world. Okay.
I hope we're going to start with a video actually. Let's see if this works. At Unilever, sustainability is core to our strategy. I want to share with you what we've been doing to reduce waste with a little bit of help from someone who really appreciates the results of our achievements.
By 2020, there will be 8 billion people on the planet, and that means more consumption, more products, and more waste. As the world has finite resources, humanity has to find new ways of conserving to protect our future. And as a large global company, Unilever has to lead the way.
We've always been working to improve our social and environmental impact. In 2010, we launched the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. One of our most important goals was to get all factories to zero waste to landfill by 2020. Previously, it took us 15 years to bring 40 sites to zero, but in 4 years, we have achieved zero at 200 more factories. This is 20 times faster and 6 years ahead of target. You might wonder how we did it. In 2008, waste was equivalent in volume to 30 Big Bens. A zero waste mindset was needed to eliminate this waste, ensuring we don't misuse the Earth's natural resources. First, we reduced waste at origin. By doing so, we contributed €200 million of savings to reinvest back into the business. The remaining waste was converted into something useful by recycling into substitute materials, organic fertilizer, and green energy. This initiated the circular flow of resources and benefits for the planet beyond what we currently measure. Along the way, our collective efforts help local communities all over the world by generating hundreds of job opportunities in areas where they're needed the most. This demonstrates the power of the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan in action. But this is just the beginning. In 2015, we'll make Unilever the first company in the industry to produce zero waste to landfill in all our facilities worldwide. And we will aim even higher. By sharing the models with our suppliers, partners, communities, customers and consumers, we can facilitate an end-to-end zero waste value chain.
It will not be easy, but it will be worth it. With the pioneering spirit, we can achieve anything. Humanity now faces this greatest challenge. Together we can help to change the world for the better. Don't you think?
So, my beautiful daughter, Holly, who gives me great sense of purpose, gave some important messages there. I think the first important message was it will not be easy. And all of us in business every day, the challenges we face, realise it's not easy. Yeah? We face challenges here. We don't have the resources. We don't have the budgets. There's no infrastructure. All things we can relate to. But actually, another more important message we can learn from our children is the way they think. So we've become conditioned and incredibly good at finding reasons why something's not possible. And you talk around, we delivered zero landfill in 67 countries, 242 sites, incredibly difficult circumstances. And I think one of the ways we were able to do that was by people thinking in a slightly different way, and rather than finding reasons why we can't do it, do the simplest thing just to say, how can we find a route for this particular waste stream? Yeah? And just think about that for a moment. So rather than I can't do this, this is impossible, etc., things we hear all the time, all too often. Just think about asking the question in a different way. How can we do this? And I tell you, I promise you, if you ask the question in this way, the answers are very, very different. I just want you to take a moment just to have a look at this photo and just have a think, what does this photo mean to you? So for me, I see an entrepreneur, so someone in an incredibly difficult environment and is making the best of what's there. And of course, it's sad, shouldn't be in that environment, but really making the best of it and just taking the opportunity. Just show another photo. And what I see here is, that young guy doesn't deserve to be in that environment. So, Holly gives me my sense of purpose, and photos like this can give me a sense of purpose of why we do these things. And I hope people, for the job they do, can find a sense of purpose in why we do it. And as change leaders, all of us are driving change within our business. And we already spoke about how difficult that is. I think if we can find a sense of purpose, if we can get our people to find a sense of purpose and why to do something, it becomes a little easier. We discuss too often what we want to do. We are great at talking about even how we're going to do it. But when you really get people to change, it's mostly for them to say, why should I do it? Why should I walk over to somewhere and do this? Why should I do my small action, which actually, if everybody does a small action, those small actions combined actually start to make a very big difference. On to the more serious things. How did we achieve zero landfill? There were five big areas. So first of all, really importantly, we're not going to generate a lot of waste and celebrate not putting it in the landfill. From 2008 to 2014, we're about 13% down in terms of the waste volume we produced, while we grew our business 25%. So, and that's what a real value is. Everybody knows that. A real value isn't about negotiating a better contract and sending some materials to a recycler rather than to the landfill, but actually the value is to stop generating that waste in the first instance. And that's where our resource resilience comes from. We pay thousands of euros a tonne, a kilo sometimes, for the ingredients we use, and we put a lot of effort on recycling, but actually where's the real value? We know that. And of course, that's where we should focus in the first instance. Traditional recycling is an interesting one, actually. If I look into a factory, I see some materials coming inside a box. We unpack the materials, we flat pack the box. We do a great job at putting that into a pile, squashing it up. Someone comes in a vehicle, goes into a mill. We put a huge amount of energy and water into it, and guess what? We make it back into a box. We have to think a little bit differently there, because great, we're recycling lots of cardboard back into a box. So when we talk about the circular economy, what does it actually mean? So a really simple thing is sell that box to Pickfords. There are also other good renewable companies out there, so I'm not going to share some Pickfords. But actually, let's sell that box on and think about the environmental impact that's not happening. By the way, you get a fixed price for it, and you can talk quite good about it. One simple example. I have something in my pocket which is really dear to me, which is this. But I was told 2 years ago that it wasn't possible to recycle some materials we have in Unilever. 4 layered laminated materials, aluminium, PE and some other materials, very, very difficult to recycle. Very difficult, possible. So in Africa, in Latin America, squash these things down. We make some corrugated roof tiles, make fence panels, and people said that's great, but that market's going to dry up, isn't it? And my point is, the opportunity there is as wide or as limited as what's between them is, because why can't we make pallets? Why can't we make this podium from this? And this is something that goes into the ground that's going to take a long, long time to decompose, if ever, in some cases. And the bit that really gets me is we make job opportunities out of it. And I say opportunity because people don't always need charity, they need opportunity. And then just very quickly, because I need to get back on piste, here's our story. And I think anyone that undertakes a difficult journey, break it down, make milestones, remember to celebrate along the way, and remember to have fun. Just within terms of the journey, we're committed to share a bit about why we're here today. This year, we want to hit our offices at distribution centres, start with our suppliers, share the model, and amplify the impact that we can have, that we learn, shine that bright light, help people along the way. And I just leave you with a little photo of collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. So may I now invite up Dave Cowell, who is the Vice President of Federation.
So good morning, everyone. So I'm David Cowell, I'm the Vice President of Procurement for Coca Enterprises. Just to clear up some history, Coca Enterprise is the franchise offerer for the Coca-Cola brand. So we manufacture and distribute products in Northwest Europe, in Great Britain, France, Belgium, Holland, Norway, and Sweden. We've got about 17 manufacturing facilities, a number of warehouses, distribution centres, and we produce about 12 billion cans and bottles per year. So we have a significant packaging footprint, we have a significant distribution footprint, which is why we embarked on a journey to embed sustainability in our end-to-end supply chain. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've done, in particular, how we see taking those forward into the future. We have a vision that we will be a low-carbon, zero-waste business, and we just heard some great stories about Unilever and how they eliminated waste. That's key to us. We operate obviously in Western Europe, so there are certain advantages in terms of waste management there. We also have a commitment out there to reduce the carbon footprint of our drinks by 1/3. That's a significant commitment that we made a couple of years ago. And again, to do that, we will only be able to do that if we collaborate across the entire supply chain. So, I've talked about three things: process, collaboration, and then the vision looking forward, and really some ideas about what we did and what can be done in the future. So the first thing we looked at was process. We need to understand what's in our end-to-end supply chain and how we can manage that. And how we did that, we have a supplier relationship management program in place. I think most companies have that in place today. Measuring the usual things like quality, service, value, innovation. But we put sustainability into that program, and we call it corporate responsibility for sustainability, CRS. We put it into that supplier relationship management program and embedded it as part of the scorecard, and it represents about 20 to 25% of the score when we do KPIs with our suppliers. But importantly, we also put it in as a process and a connection with the senior leadership of our supply base. Because again, we recognise we're only going to make progress if we've got connected at the highest level within our supply base and with our customers, and that we recognise that sustainability becomes an important component of how we work together. We then embarked on a partnership with EcoVadis. I guess many of you may know EcoVadis, which is a platform to measure sustainability criteria. And we asked all of our key suppliers to work with EcoVadis to get measured, and not just about a measurement, but also about how they could then look at improvements and ways in which they could increase their capabilities in the areas where they were scoring lower. And then the third thing we did was we set a carbon challenge to our supply base. About 3 years ago, we recognised that a significant amount of the carbon footprint that is in our supply chain sits with our supply base. And so we challenged them and said, we need to work together. You need to reduce your carbon footprint and thereby the input of carbon that comes into our business. And we did that around 4 things: measure, manage, reduce, and share. And that was really important to be transparent about the carbon footprint, about how they could measure, how they could reduce that carbon footprint. And I'll show a slide in a minute about why that's so important. And then with EcoVadis and with Supplier Segment, as with Carbon Challenge, we were able to segment our suppliers. We were able to actually put them into quadrants to see those suppliers that were operating in a very high level. They were managed, sustainability was included in their agenda. They were able to report and deliver commitments against that. And those suppliers that were still on a journey and needed some support, some help to move up the continuum, to actually grow into a supply base that would deliver against sustainability commitments. And as I say, it is a journey. We have a lot of suppliers, but I'm very pleased to say that many of our suppliers moved up that continuum. We now have regular communications about how we can bring the other suppliers into that same arena. We recognise performance. We have an annual award for our suppliers. We only have 3 actually: Best Supplier, Most Improved, and Sustainability. And the Sustainability Award has actually become probably the most important one now that we award to our suppliers. And then finally, how do you connect that all together? And we started by bringing all our suppliers in one room together and meeting and talking. But with the advent of technology, we've moved to webinars now, so WebExes or video conferences, where we can bring a lot more suppliers and stakeholders into a forum, and we can talk about the challenges that we face as a business together around sustainability. And the webinar is focused only on sustainability. And it's not us talking to our suppliers. What we actually do is ask our suppliers to come into the forum and share with the group what they're doing on sustainability, what progress they're making, good practices, best practices. And that's actually quite a powerful message, because it's our suppliers talking to our suppliers rather than us trying to give them mandates and messages. So that's the process that we've embarked upon. Challenges and why we need to collaborate. This is really just the one slide I have, but it's just to demonstrate why collaboration is so important. Nearly 70% of our carbon footprint sits outside of our own 4 walls. It sits with our ingredient suppliers, packaging, distribution, forage, etc. And you can see within our 4 walls, we can manage that. We can be very effective at how we manage sustainability within our 4 walls. The key is to manage these outside the 4 walls, and that is why end-to-end collaboration is so important, because we will not be successful with that. So, we need to recognise that. We need to have our own house in order. That was a key learning. We can't be talking to our suppliers or our customers about sustainability unless we have got our house in order, unless we've got the routines and measurements in place that we're asking of our various stakeholders. Some examples of how we've achieved that. Backhauling, I guess it's a classic place to tackle. We have a lot of trucks on the road moving around all the time. And our focus with our customers and our suppliers is to ensure we never have an empty truck, that we only have full trucks moving, and that we reduce road miles through optimization processes. An example of that would be we collaborate here in the UK with a number of retailers on backhauling opportunities. In France, we've got almost a closed loop situation with a supplier of pallets called Check, where we pick up the empty pallets, they supply the empty pallets, we bring them through to the manufacturing through to the customer, a mixture of finished goods and empty pallets. We keep that journey going so those pallets hopefully don't touch the floor, and that we've always got a fully utilised with it. Another example, we talked about waste. So we work with a company called Ardagh, a glass supplier in Holland. They have a facility very close to our plant, and we're taking waste heat from their processes, from their manufacturing facility, and we're channeling that through into our site, our manufacturing site, nearby, and we're using that heat to actually manage some of the heat processes within our own facility. So that's really a significant step forward. It's a pilot, but we're looking to explore that in other areas where it makes sense. That actually saves about 3,000 tonnes of carbon per year, so it's a significant pilot. And then finally, as was mentioned, circular economy, that's becoming an important area of focus now. And for us, that's about packaging, and a real focus now on PET recovery, collection, recycling, reprocessing back through into our own packaging. So that's basically how we challenge and collaborate with our suppliers. And then just to finish up, we need a vision. There are two things I would talk about change the future. Technology and innovation. We don't know what we don't know. But we do know that technology and innovation will play a very important role in achieving new sustainability targets, whether it's through renewable energy, whether it's in the area of bio-based packaging material, waste material, or other areas. So those are the two topics that we are going to focus on and actually work with everybody in this room and beyond how to find new ways of doing things, managing costs, but actually achieving new sustainability goals. So that's, I think, all I'd like to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So last up, can I invite Matt Wilson, Global Head of Environmental Sustainability Centre of Excellence at GSK. We've got a lot of your suppliers in the room. No pressure. Hi everyone. I'd just like to start with a slide that talks about what we do. A lot of GSK are. So we're one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies. Three divisions, pharmaceutical, consumer healthcare, and mission that runs through the organisation to help people more better and live longer. And at the core to that is innovation and access. What do I mean by innovation and access? Bringing medicines, novel medicines, to people who need them in a fast forward. And how we demonstrate that commitment? We've been number one in access to medicines for the last 3 years. We have a malaria vaccine on trial currently, and it also heard recently in the press about our Ebola vaccine as well. Climate change is really well understood by our organisation and the impact that will have on future disease vectors. And there's been some links recently to the Ebola virus and its prevalence linked to deforestation, obviously deforestation with loss of biodiversity and contribution to climate change. So we understand climate change. Impacts, we're really trying to get to prevention and not treatment, although treatment will form part of that. Just a little bit about our environmental impact. In 2010, not unlike Unilever, we refreshed our strategy and we developed our value chain carbon footprints. We've also done the same for water, and we have a waste map as well. And what I'd like to say about this is we realised that for the products that we sell and make sure our customers and patients can get, GSK's contribution in that is about 15% from our carbon footprint perspective. From a water impact perspective, we're less than 1%. And actually the two big buckets that drive most of our carbon and water impact sit within the use phase of our products. And for carbon, that's related to metered dose inhalers. I don't know if anyone's an asthma sufferer, but they have a HFA propellant in it. And we've already done great things there. We've switched from CFCs to HFAs. So that 5 million, or of that use phase, 5 million tonnes of that is a result of HFAs. That would have been 10 times larger if we hadn't switched from CFCs to HFAs. For water, one of the largest impacts is from when people brush their teeth and leave the tap running. Think about the chlorine to treat the water, the energy used to distribute that water. It's a huge, huge impact. And also supply chain. Supply chain is really interesting. A third of our carbon footprint sits in our supply chain. And we haven't got quite as many suppliers as Unilever, but just for our material suppliers, tier one material suppliers, we have over 11,000. We spend about £4 billion. And we make of the order of 1,300 products globally with 55,000 stock keeping units. So there's a huge amount of complexity in there. And
one of the mantras that runs through the organisation is there is a patient and a consumer and a customer at the end of the supply chain, and we're focused solely on making sure we deliver medicine or a product to the right quality, to the right time, at a price that someone can afford it. So our whole procurement organisation is geared up around that. That's what we're trying to achieve. So our challenge is, well, how do we then introduce another dimension? How do we make that more sustainable? How do we influence some of the choices that procurement are making? How do we engage our suppliers when they're sat down in a business review meeting and we're talking about cost, quality, delivery? How do we then how do we find the time or the bandwidth to talk about sustainability? And that's really our challenge. And for the last 4 years, we've been learning, and to be honest, it doesn't feel like we've done a lot. But I'll show you another slide, and hopefully you might think we have, and so you'll be the test on that. So a barrier to collaboration in the supply chain is bandwidth. If you think about a typical relationship, it's procurement to procurement. We never really get past that unless there's a specific project or a collaboration. But 11,000 suppliers, 55,000 SKUs, we're going to have to do more than that. So how can we do that? We've tried working with procurement, and procurement to procurement. Is there a trust issue that we need to overcome? We're not sure. So what we have done is working with a number of suppliers in the room. EcoDesk, we've started trying to measure what the environmental impact of our supply chain partners are. We're asking all of our suppliers to disclose their carbon, water and waste impact. We then went a step further forward, working with the Carbon Trust and Amoresco, and we approached about 150 of our largest suppliers, and we asked them a series of questions, which basically amounted to, is sustainability important to you? And I was really pleased to see that actually most suppliers came back and said, yes, sustainability is important to us. And of that, the most important dimension was energy. But the really interesting part is that, I think the statistics up there, 70% have targets focusing on energy, but only 35% have an active programme. And when I think about what GSK has achieved over the last 4 years, we've reduced our energy consumption by 25%, and we've reduced our carbon emissions by 10%. We've reduced our water impact by 25%, and not quite as good as Unilever, we've got half our sites now zero to landfill. So within that, I was thinking there's a huge amount of information or a huge amount of capability and expertise we can offer up into the supply chain to help accelerate what our suppliers are doing. And really interestingly as well, what are some of the best practices in the supply base, and how do we get that back? We also asked our suppliers, what about collaborating supplier to supplier? Are there any commercial issues? Does anybody have any issues with that? And less than 10% of our suppliers came back and said, we don't mind talking to other suppliers. In fact, we'd welcome the opportunity to talk to other suppliers. And that's really interesting, because you then start to think about a supply chain, rather than being linear, you can then start to think about a supply chain as a web. And how do you connect up all those spokes to drive faster improvement? And slide here now really summarises where we're up to. We work with 2 Degrees, and we've been working with 2 Degrees on a pilot for about 7 months now, and we've just had the readout. We approached initially 200 suppliers. It's purely voluntary, and we said we're launching an online collaboration portal where we can bring our suppliers together. We'll initially focus it around energy and try and generate some discussion and try and generate some actions. Huge amount of work involved setting up, huge amount of effort on behalf of 2 Degrees and also the GSK team and our suppliers. You know, we have suppliers on our steering team. David sat here is one of them. Hi, David. And really trying to help shape this programme. And again, hugely surprised by the innovation that comes across in it. We've had new packaging proposals put forward to us. We've had new technology in terms of energy and waste management. We've had William Blythe sat over on the table I'm sat at talking about iodide recovery, and we're now connecting them up to the chemists in our organisation. These conversations wouldn't have happened before because procurement just don't have the time and don't have the bandwidth to talk about it. So what we're learning is if we're going to be successful in this space, we've got to generate more connections, and we've got to break down all the traditional barriers of doing business. And I suppose just to finish, we asked our suppliers, should we continue with this initiative? And of those that responded, and it was a large chunk that did respond, 86% said yes. So there's definitely an appetite to do this. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you.
So it's your turn. 15 minutes in your team. Discuss what you've heard. See if you can generate 2 or 3 really good questions that would be useful for the team, for our panel to answer. So 15 minutes, all yours. We have some roving microphones with Matthew and William. So if we could take some questions from the floor, I'm sure we have some tables. First one, first served. Anybody? Hands up for one of the tables. Aoife, over at Aoife's table. We start off there.
So we did a couple of questions. One about whether any of the companies had an intention to extend their impact into the supply chain, so a move towards a more vertically integrated supply chain as a way of, reducing impacts. Another around what zero waste actually means. And a third one around, is zero waste the right sort of big audacious goal, and if it's an intermediate one, what actually is the right goal? So is it zero net resource use, or is it something else? And what your thoughts were on that?
Okay, so 3 questions. Vertical integration, is that part of the answer? And then 2 questions on zero waste. Should we start with the zero waste one? Tony, do you want to kick off, and then David and Matt do join in?
Sorry. Remind me the first zero waste question.
What do we really mean by zero waste? Okay. And then the second one is that just an intermediary goal? Should we be looking for something beyond that?
Sure, okay. So with regards to the first question, interestingly, you will all know no global standard exists for waste to landfill, but we're very clear about ours. So when we talk about zero waste to landfill, we're saying zero non-hazardous waste to landfill. And people that operate in some difficult countries will know in some countries we have to put hazardous waste in some areas. So in South Africa, food waste is hazardous above a certain moisture level into the landfill that we have to put it into. Yeah. So of course we're working to avoid that. So our definition, zero non-hazardous waste to landfill, is no landfill, no incineration without energy, so it has to have a purpose, which differs from one organisation to another. And within that, we're actually working on what's the most valuable element of what we do with the waste we generate. So you'll remember I spoke first about let's reduce that waste at source, and that will come back on the second question. But for us, the highest value when something leaves our sites, let's make sure it hits reuse. And we all do it today, actually, because you think about pallets. Think about pallets. So if we didn't reuse pallets in a pallet pool, that would actually be waste. You would recycle it. But the fact that these pallets go around hundreds, I'm not an expert on pallets, but go around hundreds of times is a great reuse example. And we have to kind of, transform the way we think about waste and get more of those going. So that's our definition of what's zero landfill. And lots of people would also ask, are you sending, what about the UK, how much are you sending waste to energy? Is this the way you did it? Less than 1% waste to energy in the UK. We still have some difficult bits and we put it waste to energy, but you can over-intellectualise about this definition, or you can do something about it. And as I say to people, the first flight didn't go across the Atlantic. What we did absolutely isn't perfect, but we've made a flight and it helped us to improve it. Okay. And then, sorry, the second question.
So is this just an intermediary step? Yeah. So what should you really be aiming for?
So I think that's a great question. This is absolutely an intermediary. And I said earlier, don't celebrate too wildly the fact that we generated lots of waste and then say, but we recycled it all. So we're 13% down versus 2008, and one of the hottest buzzwords at the moment is circular economy and so on. That's why I think we should actually only be allowed to mention those words if we can come with an example of it. And my vision would be to make some of our factories, everything that comes in either goes out in a product or goes back to the supplier. I mean, probably the easiest things we can do is get this circular back to the supplier. It's really worth a lot of money as well. Boxes. Why can't it come in a cage and not a box? Go backwards and forwards. And the quality people will tell you, well, it's because of this, because of this. Remember, how can we? Let's get a nice aseptic layer around it, whatever we do. So it's absolutely the first step. And keep watching the news.
Okay. David, do you have a different definition of zero waste, and is it intermediary or?
No, I would say it's similar. So we operate not in some of the countries that Tony is, so it's Northwest Europe. But I would say, not zero waste to landfill, that's clear. That's a clear indication. I think where we focus on now is actually eliminating any waste at all. And I talked earlier about collaboration, and that's where we're working with the suppliers. So do we need to put layer pads on? Do we need to shrink wrap pallets when they come into the facility? So and with customers, sorry, I should say with customers as well. So can we take some of that packaging, that secondary packaging out? Can we remove some of the stuff so it doesn't become waste material at any point in time? And the second one is collaborating with our waste management companies. I think CETA are here, and other companies, finding ways in which we can improve on the reuse of some of the materials. So an example would be if we have PET bottles in our facility, if we don't use them, we can shred them. So if they become not in the production line, we can shred them and put them back into the process and reuse that. So I think the key is now it's moved on from, I think we're all agreed we don't want waste. It's about how do you not just avoid landfill, but actually stop the waste generation itself, which I think is similar to what Tony was saying.
Yeah. Matt, do you have a different perspective, or? You can move on to the next question if you want. Can I move on to the next? Yeah, about vertical. Yeah, go on. So the question really was: is there need to be thinking about reintegrating parts of your supply chain as a way of managing risk, costs, and impacts? And is that a practical possibility?
I'll talk about one of our products in India, Horlicks. We have approximately 30,000 dairy farmers that feed a number of milk collection centres. Those milk collection centres then cool and refrigerate the milk and then supply them to our factories. And there's huge pressure in India on milk and milk supply. I think annual milk price inflation is about 13% a year. The Indian government has an aspiration to, and I think they've achieved it now, stop importing milk products from abroad and develop their internal market. And that means now that supply is constrained, for want of a better word. They're reliant on the domestic market. So there's some innovation appearing in that supply chain. And GSK has to ask itself the question, are we good at working with farmers, and what do we know about milk production, etc. So I think there's a real challenge. I think it comes back to I think it was your point earlier, Martin, which was what are we good at and what should we stick to, what's our core business? And I think what we're good at is not milk farming, but what we are potentially good at is linking up those disparate parts of the supply chain together. So we've moved away at one of our facilities from being vertically integrated, and we've now increased the number of tier one suppliers, but we've maintained the links back to the farmers, and we're working with the farmers to understand and help mitigate their water impact, their carbon impact, to help them with access to feed, fodder, veterinary care, etc. So I think that the question is probably a bit too black and white. I think there's a mixed model to fix that.
Very good. Another question? Yes. Well, we'll do that table there first, William, and then we'll come to team whatever it is. I can't see that badge. Alison's table. Okay, 10. So we'll do this one over here first.
It's a question around collaboration. How can you separate...
Sorry, could you just say who you are first?
Sorry, it's Simon Brown here from ADEC Innovations. Question is, how can you separate out the pre-competitive areas where people are open to collaboration from concerns about losing competitive advantage?
Who wants to have a go? Go on then.
So it's a really good question, and that's how we started the conversation, where we had a number of our suppliers not wanting to collaborate for fear of the competitive environment, and particularly in some of the big packaging companies where clearly there's a market share type discussion going on. But I'm really pleased to say that evaporated fairly quickly, because I think if the stakeholders within the supply chain embrace sustainability at the right level within the organisation, then it doesn't become a competitive issue. It becomes a collaborative issue. And actually, we're just talking how can we do more of that within industry as well? Because it's only together that we will be stronger than if we operate in separate parts. And I mentioned that we have these supplier webinars, and it's great. We have all of our competitive suppliers, whether it's cans, bottles, glass, in the same room talking about the same things. And in fact, we encourage them as groups to talk to each other about sustainability, because it isn't really a competitive issue if you take it off the table and say it's actually part of doing business and actually wanting to achieve let's say, new goals in the future as an industry and as a collaborative connection with your suppliers and stakeholders.
It's beautiful, really, because you've done exactly what I said we do. You've given lots of reasons why we can't do it. So I challenge back, how can we do it? And I give you an example. The easiest collaboration organisations find to sit together on is something like safety. Yeah? So Unilever sits with P&G, with Nestle, on safety. And the reason we do is because we know why we sit together on safety. Yeah? Because we care about our people. We don't want fatalities in our organisations. But I've challenged back round and asked the question again, how can we make it happen? And let's understand why we must make it happen.
I suppose my view would just be clear about what you're collaborating on, and there are pretty clear antitrust rules around what you can and can't talk about, and if you avoid those, then pretty much, if you're willing, you can discuss anything, and a lot of the themes that run through sustainability, everyone faces the same challenges, so you can legitimately have that conversation and address some of those issues. So I think just be brave, work with your legal team. We had to. Took a long time to get over the concerns and set a clear framework for the discussions.
Yeah. Well, John, we'll come to table 10 in a second, but certainly I don't know if you feel the same about it, but it seems to me that sustainability is one of those lenses that gives permission to people to have conversations they wouldn't otherwise have. And it comes back, I think, Tony, to your idea that the heart of all of this is the motivating why, the business with purpose, that you're able to tap into. That means, in fact, you can deal with and address things which are probably very mundane operational issues which could be done better, but you'd never get to talking about how they could be done better if it wasn't for the permission that sustainability gives you.
Can I have to say one thing?
Yes, of course you can, and then we'll go to table 10.
Just one thing, sorry. So my little Holly said it will not be easy. But she also said, but it will be worth it. Okay.
Hello, Anne-Marie Bruder from Forum for the Future. My question is, how do you present, you're all in very large companies, how do you present a joined-up approach to your supply chain? And I'm thinking in particular about, you could discuss with your, suppliers some brilliant sustainability initiatives that you're going to work on together. And at the same time, they might well be saying, yes, but we're getting completely squeezed by your buyers. And we do have experience of talking to companies who experience this problem, who are pushed around implementing sustainability initiatives, but at the same time, are also squeezed by the buyers. So how do you present that joined-up approach within your own very large organisations?
For me, you have to follow the path of least resistance. And what I mean by that is we're not going to talk about everything immediately. But for example, for us on Zero Landfill, we made a commitment, it's in writing, where we said we'll share with our suppliers and so on and so on. In, I believe, June of this year, we'll pull them together and we'll share a framework with something to take away where people can do that. So it's one example, and that's why I say we sometimes choose to try and follow a difficult path, and it can take our energy and prove to us that things aren't possible. But the way you can open collaboration sometimes is to start in a way where you can do it and people do want to do it, and suddenly new relationships develop, is from my perspective.
David, can I ask you to take this question next, just because if I'm not being too forward, you're probably at the sharp, pointy end of this question and this dilemma.
Yeah, okay. So we need to recognise, obviously, we're a business, we're a large business, and obviously we need to ensure that we have a competitive supply chain. But I don't think the two are disconnected. I think you can have the conversation and you can also talk about sustainability and talk about the end-to-end supply chain and the value you can get from that. So there are two things. I would say there are a number of areas of sustainability that can be cost beneficial, and we've seen that in the past. Reducing the weight of the package is cost beneficial. So new technology to do that, invest in that, might mean that a supplier would gain incremental business because they're investing behind technology. So that would be one area. I think the other area is as Tony said, we've made a commitment to sustainability, so you have to look at it at a broader scale rather than saying individual negotiations. You need to look at it as a business to ensure that overall you're managing your costs, but within that you're accepting that there may be variations to ensure that you have sustainable sourcing or sustainable packaging. And I'm pleased to say within CCU we have CEO support, for example, on capital expenditure. We will divert capital to sustainable projects which wouldn't have the same return necessarily as a normal business requirement that has, let's say, 15% ROI. So that's good news. So we've got that, plus the fact we've got that flexibility to say that we need, given that we're committed behind it, that we need to manage it in the total context. And that's why I mentioned about innovation and technology, because we can't truly expect to pay more for sustainability in the future. It's not sustainable to keep adding costs. We have to find the right ways in which to build sustainability in at a competitive cost, and not the lowest cost, but a competitive cost.
I suppose I'd just like to add to that, and I think if you approach it in the right way, it actually brings value, mutual value. And I just remind you the slide I put up there which said half of the suppliers that we questioned didn't have a target for energy, and even less had an active programme. And I think we've made 3 or 4 we've taken our learnings from our energy reduction programme and applied that now in 4 suppliers. And I think the average energy saving opportunity at facilities is about 40%. And ranging from cost savings of £1 to £1.5 million a year. So I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. What I am a bit personally concerned about is that we end up resulting in using cost as a lever to be more sustainable, rather than being able to have that more optimistic conversation is, well, if we are more sustainable, what opportunity does that deliver?
Great. All right. One last question down here, and then it'll probably be time. So if we could hold your questions, capture them, and we'll get back to them. But one more from this table.
Hi, Courtney Evans from Unilever. Just a quick question, just heading on what you just mentioned, Matt. Actually, around the value proposition to suppliers, what's your messaging to them, and how do you intend to scale that messaging with your new collaboration? Is it, are you going for the gusto with the messaging and then, delivering outcomes and making those outcomes really clear at the beginning? This is what we want to achieve, and this is why we want you to do it.
Courtney, could you phrase that again?
Yeah.
And who are you aiming it at?
I think, it's for everyone, really, but when you're dealing with your suppliers, I think what we need to think about is the value proposition to them. Why should they collaborate with us and each other? And I think a lot of that is about messaging. So are you presenting the messaging on the value proposition quite early and saying this is the outcomes that we want to achieve, and then going from that angle, or are you just saying,
Okay. So how are you communicating with suppliers to put across the value proposition that collaborating with you on sustainability is a valuable thing to do for them?
I think when we launched our pilot, we did a couple of things. We talked and we invited some of our customers to come and talk to our suppliers by way of a WebEx. So we played back to our supply chain what we're being asked to deliver. So the NHS Sustainable Development Unit, they're clear they want to reduce the carbon impact of the NHS. Tesco's are a major retailer we supply to. Clearly they've got some ambitions around reducing their environmental impact. And you know what? They buy stuff from us. And they've done the same analysis, and they show their supply chains. That's where most of their carbon footprint is, and we're right there. So first thing was passing on our customer expectations to our suppliers. And I suppose then the second lever was actually, there is an expectation, but there's real opportunity in this. And the opportunity that we think there is both from a financial perspective, a quality perspective, a delivery perspective, and plus the added value, the innovation. How do we bring new innovation that we wouldn't have got at ordinarily to increase top line sales as well as reduce the bottom line?
Okay. Well, look, I think we should call it, because the coffees and the tea and the first break is calling and we'll be running late. I think that sets the tone very nicely for this morning. I hope you had good discussions on your table. Big round of applause, please, for Tony, Matt and Dave.